Alright, so we got a couple of days before Superman comes out. With an entire universe of shows, games, and movies dependent on its success, the pressure is on for the Man of Steel. In an age dominated by DC's red colored rival, people are already counting out the Blue Boy Scout. But for a lot of folks who still remember what it felt like to be in awe for the man who has everything, yet still chooses to look out for the little guy, this new film is something to look forward to despite the messy path it took to get here. So, no matter how bleak the world may seem sometimes, movies like Superman should be something to look forward to, especially for people who are invested in these characters. To jump into the whole fandom environment of writing your own stories, predictions, and unrealistic expectations, here's how a fan hopes the new Superman movie would go. Originally, I was gonna draw out all of these scenes, but with the rate I was going, I'd probably be finished by the time Batman Part 2 by Matt Reeves came out. And all I'd have to show for it are these drawings that look like they were made by children. And although for a moment I was tempted to use AI, a spark of inspiration came when I came across some Superman merchandise. Had a little bit of a Ratatouille moment as I remember those little stop motion videos kids who grew up with YouTube loved.
I'm still alive! Yay!
With how expensive these pieces of plastics are, especially brands like Lego, I thought about the next best thing. What better way to show these sparks of creativity than with the peak of DC gaming, Scribblenauts, and the Lego Batman series? So with that little segue out of the way, here's how a fan hopes Superman would go, with some realistic expectations based on the footage we've already gotten. To push that whole comics are a modern mythology statement, what better way to start the film with in medias res, or the fancy pants Latin term for starting the story in the middle. So just like the trailer, Superman crashes in the Arctic, beaten, bloody, and bruised. Big. Here's this super powerful alien that people for years have been describing as something akin to a god, defeated. Mr. Gunn slaps us right in the face by showing us that this version of Superman is a lot more vulnerable. So keeping this ball rolling, suddenly he whistles. And then this wonderful ball of fur comes into the scene. What better way to reinforce that link to humanity than with a superpowered version of man's best friend? But here comes another sudden change. This time, instead of having a well behaved and trained companion, we have this playful rascal jumping on Soups, risking even greater damage to his body. So, after a much deserved scolding, Crypto finally gets it and drags Superman back into the Fortress of Solitude, where we have Superman robots on standby, ready to provide some Kryptonian emergency services. We get the whole painful solar recharge. So, as Soups is getting treated, that's where we go jump back into the past. Now, interviews and behind the scenes footage already mentioned that we're not going to delve into the origin story since everyone and their mother knows the whole scientist warns world doesn't listen, world about to blow up, scientists send baby on rocket, kaboom, the end, the beginning. But it would be cool to see glimpses of this new DCU version of that origin story. With maybe instead of a rocket ship, we'd have a rocket powered iron giant baby thing bring Clark to Earth. Eventually, we jump into the present at the Daily Planet, where, oh no, a war is happening in a fictional nation in the Middle East. So, in the midst of battle, a little kid is seen waving a non colonizing flag. Seeing this on TV, Superman leaps into action wearing his good old red and blue outfit. Soups swoops in with his aura and saves this kid. They have a nice little moment, and the kid expresses how grateful he is. Superman saves the innocent, three cheers from the crowd, woo hoo. Superman then returns to the States. Suddenly, a flying not juggernaut on behalf of one of the previously mentioned fictional Middle Eastern countries comes in and cheap shots Superman. For some reason, not juggernaut's punches are hurting him a lot more than usual. A green hue comes out of his fists and it's revealed to be kryptonite. So Superman gets knocked across and falls into the Arctic, back to where we started the film. It jumps to Superman quickly recovering from his injuries, and after a back and forth with Krypto telling him to stay, he goes and flies back, finally defeating not Juggernaut. Three cheers from the crowd, woohoo. So with all of this going on, we get Chekhov's kryptonite, with it being revealed that Lex Luthor coordinated these attacks. It seems that Lex is cooking something up with other collaborators. Focusing back on Clark, we see that instead of the public supporting Superman, the news and media are calling his save an international incident, with headlines calling Superman's interference as American interference. He gets grilled hard, even by his own lover, Lois Lane. Enter the scene where Lois interviews Superman about the whole meddling in a foreign conflict thing. Not to become a rant, but you know the whole Superman is an idea that we should aspire to in order to become a better version of ourselves. Well, one aspect of being a better version of ourselves is not allowing our emotions to get the better of us. Instead of a restrained version of the Man of Steel, what we're getting instead is someone more expressive. Now, this is just a small part of all the footage that's been revealed so far, but Clark losing his composure and screaming at Lewis for grilling him in an interview just doesn't feel right. You'd think that someone who is in the same profession would understand that asking the hard questions is part of the job. And with all that experience, you'd think as well that they'd realize that you should be more level headed when being on the receiving end of this questioning, especially if these outbursts could lead to accidental use of deadly powers. But no, instead, he shouts defensively. Obviously, I think the common belief in our own real world would be that he did the right thing and people are being way too hard on Soups. But as the saying goes, when you have great power, you also pose a great risk when you lose your temper. So, despite the trailer showing otherwise, I had really hoped that this version of Superman would have been more emotionally mature, stemming from his simple upbringing. Speaking of simple upbringings, a great flow to this story would be to have Clark take a break from the toxicity of this opinionated world by going back to his roots. A great way to do this would probably have Lewis opening up the suggestion in the first place. So they pack their stuff and take a little trip down to Smallville. Here we finally meet Ma and Pa Kent. We get these series of scenes where Clark's parents comfort him, giving him the whole inspiring motivational messages, something about how do the right thing even when it's hard. So as these scenes would play out, we'd get glimpses of Clark's childhood here and there, and his entire Smallville upbringing leads him to leaving home and arriving at the Daily Planet, where he meets Jimmy, Perry, and the whole gang. So as Clark is relaxing in his childhood home, they go through the TV, and all of a sudden, giant kaiju monster is attacking Metropolis. Ma and Pa can say, "Go get him, boy," and he wears his suit and he tries to save as many as he can, but this monster is a little bit too great to handle on his own. Enter the Justice League International, who for some reason is called the Justice Gang in this.
Justice Gang.
Sponsored by Maxwell Lord, with the team consisting of Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific, and Mr. Bullcut Green Lantern, Guy Gardner. Now, I love Nathan Fillion, but I really wish he was Hal Jordan instead. He already voiced the character before in a lot of good animated movies.
Yeah, that's the way it is.
Given how the other Lantern cores are going to be eventually explored, one major storyline involving Guy that I really hope would be explored one day is when he transformed the Red Lanterns into an anti-hero space biker gang, where he even had a biker stash. Not to discredit Nathan, but I just don't see him pulling that off. Anyway, through their combined efforts, they beat the giant monster. However, despite saving a lot of people, with the mob's anger heightened by the recent reputational damages from the media due to the Middle East incident, the crowd turns on Superman, throwing slurs and beer cans at him. Although Guy Gardner and the rest of the Justice Gang are most likely in the earlier Middle East scenes, I think that introducing them a little bit later on would have been better in order to drive the focus more on Superman. Maybe we could have them trying to recruit Superman throughout the film, but it would make more sense to have the Justice Gang come in at a time where they would protect Superman from the crowd, showing that even the Man of Steel needs support. So as we're getting this pep talk from the group telling Superman that it's fine, suddenly he realizes something's wrong. He speeds back to the Fortress of Solitude. So as the Justice Gang and Supes were fighting this giant monster, Lex took this opportunity to travel to the Fortress of Solitude, destroying the Superman robots and stealing as many Kryptonian tech as he could. Crypto tries to defend his home, but is overpowered by Ultraman, who's probably an amalgamation of Bizarro and or Ulysses from the New 52, using the Ultraman name as a placeholder. Joining them in this attack is the Engineer, who is a Wildstorm character. More on that probably later on in this entire new DC universe. So, Crypto is kidnapped and Lex and his gang escape. Arriving at the fortress, Superman sees the destroyed robots and he screams in sorrow. The sorrow transforms into rage as he realizes that Crypto's gone and he sees parts of Luthor tech on the ground. Speeds into Lex Luthor's office. Here, we get the second time Superman has an outburst. Compared to the previous interview scene where he shouts at Lois, I'm willing to cut Clark some slack with the whole Lex stealing Crypto part. I'm sure a lot of people would relate to the rage Superman's feeling right now, knowing that someone potentially harmed your own pup. With this attack and outburst at Lex Luthor comes consequences. Amanda Waller orders Rick Flag Sr. and the rest of the United States Army to arrest Superman. Accompanied by Ultraman and the Engineer, Superman accepts his arrest peacefully. Superman is then brought into that dome prison where he's locked up with Metamorpho. The Justice Gang meet up with Lois to think of a way to break out Superman. As the whole planning thing is happening, we see that Lex is tinkering with the Kryptonian technology that he's stolen. But as he's messing around with all of the stuff that he is still learning how to use, we see that he releases something. So whether that's Brainiac, Kryptonian criminals, or a combination of all these things, it shows that interfering with alien technology could actually lead to a bunch of huge problems. On this cool spaceship, the Justice Gang and Lois eventually find Lex Luthor's base filled with gooners. The Justice Gang, showing off all of their abilities, fights against the Luthor goons, and Lois comes face to face with Superman imprisoned. So she finds a way to release or weaken the barriers of his prison cell. Superman is released and he fights a couple of dudes, even knocking some of their teeth out. Superman eventually comes face to face with Ultraman, who's revealed to be the amalgamation of characters I previously mentioned. So it doesn't really matter who they are unless they're building towards the crime syndicate and the multiverse again, which is highly unlikely since this is just a fresh start for the DC cinematic universe. So anyway, the main cue of this reveal is heat vision coming out of Ultraman's eyes, where him and Superman have this very intense staring competition. So Crypto and the rest of the Justice Gang and a newly freed Metamorpho fight against the other Luthor goons and the Engineer and come out on top. So through the power of friendship, he beats Ultraman, Lex, and the Engineer. 3 cheers from the crowd. Woo hoo. So Superman and Lex go home to do what lovers do. Superman and Lois go home. Shippers are gonna have a field day with that. Anyway, as they're about to do some romance, a super death machine thing who's probably Brainiac goes online and is about to destroy Metropolis or the world. Lois, being the mature one, sets aside the hanky-panky and does an inspirational message of go get them, tiger. And Superman puts on his boots to save the day. So through some Starman posting, Superman finally does indeed save the world for real. 3 cheers from the crowd. Woo hoo. So the Justice Gang, now with a newly recruited Metamorpho, try and get Superman to come on board. This time, however, instead of directly declining them, he says he'd consider it as long as they change the name. So Guy Gardner and Maxwell Lord take that as a maybe, and this new Justice group have a celebration. Cue the after credits. Lex Luthor is imprisoned. The engineer, however, is being recruited by Rick Flag Sr. and Amanda Waller to join an initiative to assemble a new authority under the guidance of the US government. Inspired by Guy Gardner, the engineer flips them off. Alright, another after credits scene. So, as Clark and Lewis are spending some time at Smallville with Crypto, Ma, and Pa Kent, a knock on the door can be heard, and we see a blonde girl come up to Clark and hugging him, asking, "How are you, cousin?"
Let's go bowling.
Honestly, I had something completely different written out originally, but given the facts of what's already been shown through the trailers and behind the scenes interviews, hoping for something completely different despite the reality would have been pointless. But one thing I wish they eventually do add to the character of Superman in this new universe is his transformation into a more idealized and stoic version that people can look up to. Again, the whole outburst thing with Lewis, it doesn't blend well for someone who's supposed to be a little bit more restrained given the powers that he has. In a time where everyone seems to be hyperreactive, where idealism is crushed by cynicism, Superman should be an exemplar we look up to. And although time and again people will fail to reach this example, the main point of symbols are that they push us to keep on trying to better ourselves no matter what. And in these attempts, we can say, hey, I'm proud of that I tried, and I'm glad to be where I am right now. Anyway, that's how a fan hopes Superman would be for other people.
There's a star